Okay, Chair Tabota, you're live.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again. Okay, let's call the meeting to order for October 14th, 2020. I got 4:05 on my clock here. Let me take roll. I am here. Wendy Leese.
Here.
Tom
Present.
Pollock. Tom
Here.
Pollock.
Here.
Robert Juneman.
Here.
Big Al is here.
Yes.
Matthew.
Here.
Anna Verska. Yes.
Here.
And Tom Arnold.
Here.
And we've got, let's see, we've got Carol, we've got Jennifer, we've got Angie, and we've got Anna Baca for staff. We have the liaisons, the Mayor Foley and Mayor Pro Tem Stevens. And anybody else? Okay. Thank you, everybody. Okay, public comments. Angie, I think you mentioned as of a couple hours ago, there were no public comments.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Minutes, as you know, we've been accumulating minutes. As you can see here, we've got, looks like 5 months worth. And we were in, I'm not pointing fingers or anything like that. I'm just saying, when we started Zooming, we were, I guess the committee was advised to don't have to approve the minutes at the specific subsequent meeting. So you can see a number of accumulated, and we're changing course. So we will be approving minutes going forward on a monthly basis like we normally do. So, and we can do these minutes. We don't have to approve each month individually. We can remove or approve them as a group. Angie sent them out, I think last Friday. There was an adjustment to the June 10th meeting minutes that just came out, I believe, this morning. And I hope people had a chance to review the minutes. And with that, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes. And then after we get a motion in a second, if there's any discussion, we can do that at that time.
I move to approve all of the minutes from March, April, May, June. And with a correction, I did see that come across, but I just got it a little while ago, so I'm not sure. Maybe Angie can tell us what that correction, what that addition was. But I would also like to, well, I'll just make the motion and see if there's a second, because I wanted to suggest something else.
Okay, I think you stopped at June. Do you also mean September?
Was September? Yes, September too. I read that, but I just didn't write on my little notepad.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the 5 months, March, April, May, June, and September. There was no meeting in July and August. That's why there's nothing there. A second?
I'll second.
That was Tom, that was you?
I think Bob and I were both doing it. So if Bob wants to be the second, that's fine.
Okay, Bob, you get the prize. Angie, that's a good idea. Could you comment briefly on the adjustment or the change to the June 10th minutes?
On the June 10th meeting,
Yes, please.
The revision was that we added Al Malone's statement underneath the second motion as to why he was opposed to the second motion. The opposition was due to there was no support to a path of funding CIP in years to come without considering systematic changes to avoid future budget crises.
Okay.
All right. So as amended to include that, but I would also like to see, I can't remember which minutes it was on, but when it refers to a committee member or 3 committee members or community members, I think we should have the name of the committee member. And if we know the name of the community member, it should be part of the minutes, not just anonymous community member or anonymous committee member.
I agree.
I agree.
There was a community member that made a voicemail comment on one of the minutes that there was no name provided, so I had no idea who it was.
Okay, I kind of thought that, but there was a couple references to 3 pension committee or finance committee members. I think we need to put our names on there.
Okay,
But
if
you don't have to do it now, just in the future. Don't worry about going back.
Good idea.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. I think where we had a name for a public comment, the speaker, I think Angie's always included the name. Sometimes there's, as she said, that sometimes there's no names given or provided. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, with that, could I take a vote to approve the minutes, all 5 of those minutes?
Aye.
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 I guess I need to do that. I guess I need to do this verbally, don't I? Okay, I'm going to vote aye. Wendy?
Aye.
Tom? Pollock?
Aye.
I'm sorry?
Aye.
Robert Juman? Bob?
Aye.
Al Malone?
Aye.
Matthew?
I'll abstain because I wasn't at all of them.
Okay, Anna?
Aye.
And Tom Arnold?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes, I guess 7 with 1 abstention. Okay, thank you. And these are what they call action minutes. So it doesn't go into comments, pros and cons or whatever. It's really summarizing the action that the committee takes. I think the best we can do is if there is a discussion, the minutes can summarize there was a discussion amongst the committee members, pros and cons, but individual members' comments will not be spelled out in the minutes. The big difference since we've been Zooming, the minutes typically could be 1 page or maybe 1.5 pages. The big difference is when we were meeting in person, there were a lot more member comments, and those were summarized on the minutes. And since we haven't had member comments, that's one reason the minutes themselves have been shorter than before. And with that, then we have item 5, which is committee member comments. And I think, Angie, again, you said as of a couple hours ago, there were no member comments?
No, I did send one out. I received 1 comment from Anna Verska.
Oh, you did? Okay. All right. Okay, quite frankly, I haven't read that yet. Okay, thank you, Anna. Okay, let's move on. Then we have one major and new business here, really taking a first look at the final unaudited, maybe I shouldn't say final, the unaudited results for FY 19-20. I appreciate Carol and staff's efforts on this because we're chipping away in a way. We're getting sooner looks at the prior year. A year ago, year and a half ago, the soonest we saw the results for the prior year was typically when the CAFR was issued in December. And I think starting last year, working with staff, we got a review in the November timeframe, and now this is October. So we're getting a sooner peek at what the actuals looked like for the prior month. So appreciate staff's effort in that regard. And with that, Carol, why don't you and take it away then for FY 19-20.
Thank you, Ralph. And I did want to say a special thank you to the committee. It's been an honor to prepare these 19-20 numbers alongside you, even as we started going through the COVID. I wanted to really emphasize that these are very preliminary, unaudited numbers. Literally, the auditors just came through the door and started looking at our all of our invoices and our ledger. So these numbers are subject to change. So anything that they can find, 1% is about 1.4 million, can sway either way. So I did want to make sure that there is an emphasis on how preliminary these numbers are. But with that, I'll start sharing a PowerPoint presentation. I apologize for not sending it out earlier. Really, we just wrapped it up just a couple minutes ago to provide you with the most up-to-date information possible as of today. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay. So can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
I can.
Yes.
Looks good.
Okay, there we go. So this evening, we'll go through our preliminary unaudited 1920 results. And as you are aware, COVID really started to hit us in mid-March, where we started to take drastic indications on our fiscal, going to council, preparing some very immediate and swift action on getting ahead of COVID-19. We'll go through our preliminary general fund reserve balances and just a budget recap on the current year. Now, we don't have the first quarter results yet for 2021. However, I did, since this all kind of ties together because of COVID, wanted to remind you where 2021 was. So as a recap for 1920, so as you know, the fiscal year started July 1st, 2019, and we wrapped up the fiscal year just a couple months ago at the end of June 30th on 2020. On 1920 mid-year report, we took it to council on February 11th. In that report, we made some staffing changes. We appropriated some monies for our fire department overtime, and we also appropriated some net neutral fiscal impacts on some minor grants that we received up until that period of time. However, on March 17th, COVID hit, Governor Newsom lockdown orders were implemented, and so began our current situation with COVID. By April 21st, City Council adopted cost containment plan so we can start getting ahead of COVID, and we'll go through some of those efforts. So for our expenditure side, our general fund expenditures, we came in under our expense side for about $4.8 million. You may recall when we first started going through the 1920 impacts, we were targeting about $4 million of department-wide reductions, and that's just their operating. They came in much better than we anticipated at 4.8 million. For our revenues, our taxes did take a hit, which we had been talking about throughout the last quarter of the fiscal year, to a tune of about $4.7 million. We had some other adjustments in other categories for a total reduction in revenues against adopted budget of about $4.1 million. So this is our major category. Our sales and property taxes make up about 75% of our total general fund revenues. So I wanted to provide here for you what these amounts were looking like year over year. So this does not compare it to the budget at all. It's to kind of provide you an analysis of, you can see property taxes is continuing to increase, was not really impacted by COVID. Sales tax, you do see the impact here with COVID. And I did want to remind you, in the last fiscal year, in 2018-19, we received about $3 million of one-time sales tax revenues, which is why you see that bump up in 18-19. But if you look on the bottom graph, you'll see even our sales tax was showing growth before COVID hit. And then obviously once COVID hit, the lockdown orders came into place from the state. And we started seeing those impacts in that last quarter. For our sales tax, we're growing about 11.5% since 14-15. That includes COVID. If COVID had not hit, we would have seen a 23% growth. And our property tax has grown about 35%. Our TOT, as you are all aware, is probably one of the taxes that really took the largest impact. Having the tourism industry being impacted, business conferences, all those types of travel that normally occurs in the springtime and into the summer has really taken a drastic impact to our transient occupancy tax, otherwise known as our hotel tax. So we see about straight $8-9 million, and then in 1920 we take that hit to 7. So that was the last quarter of the fiscal year that we saw that dramatic reduction in revenues. And then for our adopted budget, just as a reminder, we did adopt at $5 million. So to give you a adopted versus actuals look for our revenue categories, our property taxes thankfully came in higher. It's about $2 million higher than we were anticipating for the adopted budget. Our sales tax is about $2.9 million total impact. Our TOT, $3 million. On taxes alone, we took a $4.7 million revenue hit in that last quarter. So for COVID, so we'll go a little bit into some of our COVID impacts and what happened since COVID hit. On March 13th, the city of Costa Mesa was the very first city in Orange County to declare the emergency. A week later, Governor Newsom implemented the lockdown. Within 30 days of us going to the council to ratify the emergency, staff presented to the city council a cost containment plan that was adopted to start reducing the impact on 1920. So there were 2 scenarios that were presented to the council that evening: a $10 million reduction and an $18 million, which was our worst case scenario. From the numbers that I have already shown you, you can already see we were closer to that $10 million reduction by implementing most of these items to contain costs. We targeted hiring freeze. We implemented an essential services only process. We implemented that process department-wide. What that entailed was any department who wanted to spend from that moment forward, they had to provide an essential firm describing the cost to the city's coffers and why it was essential. That really made an impact in slowing down the expenses in that last quarter. And we also took forth and implemented FEMA documentation protocols. We created an emergency fund. We created emergency files. We created timesheets, activity logs to start tracking all of the FEMA related documentation needed to support reimbursement efforts and other federal and state emergency funds coming to the city to help us offset some of these expenses that we were and continue to experience. Some of the actions we started taking to get ahead of 2021, knowing full well that COVID-19, we did not know and still do not know when there will be an end to COVID-19. In April, May, right at the same time that we're before council and council's taking action to cost contain the fiscal situation, we started implementing negotiations with all of our 9 associations, safety and miscellaneous, for a 10% employee furlough. So when we first started coming to the associations, we were asking for a 10% employee furlough. By May 19th, we're in front of the city council, started to prepare the council and the city for our preliminary general fund revenue and expenditure estimates, starting to prepare a plan for some of the revenue reductions that we would be anticipating because of COVID. By June 9th, we were presenting the proposed budget, and by June 16th, the budget was adopted. By the end of June, all 9 associations had come to the table with 5% furloughs including our police and fire associations. Our impacts of COVID-19. So the city has received multiple sources of funding to help either our small businesses or the city's disaster expenditures. So for example, we received $2.7 million for our small business grant program. We received about $900,000 from the county to help offset some of our COVID expenditures. $1.4 million from the state, again, for our COVID expenditures. We have been reimbursed from the county for our hotel motel voucher programs for our homeless population. Cal OES recently approved over $900,000 for FEMA eligible expenses for reimbursements. Now this money we have not received any funding for, however, it's moved on to the next phase. We've also received $1.8 million in CDBG COVID funding for our rental assistance, utility assistance, food assistance, and motel hotel vouchers for our homeless. So to provide you with an overview of where we are with our emergency expenditures and revenues, we have received in 1920 $1.1 million. Of that money, $995,000 came from the county, and about $90,000 were for reimbursements from the homeless motel voucher program. Our expenditures were about $3.4 million. So in 1920 year end, we're looking at an estimated $2.3 million deficit in this emergency fund. However, we have already started receiving the $1.4 million from the state. Now, because of accounting rules, the $1.4 million were not allowed to recognize into 1920 at this time. Therefore, it's now being recognized in 2021. But it is to help offset those expenditures that the city has been partaking in since March that will help offset that deficit. The FEMA reimbursement, which we have not received to date, and we don't know at this point in time how much or if we'll be receiving those funds of about $940,000. And to date, we've expended in 2021, which is since July 1 to date, about $490,000. So year to date on this fund alone, it's about $400,000 in a deficit. So how does that pair along with our general fund? So our revenues, 137.6, really on par with our expenditures. I cannot be much more happy with the departments, the council, and the city staff on really pulling together and making this work for a slight $200,000 to the positive by year end. Now, again, this number may change, but how we're looking at right now is pretty much we're balanced in the general fund. However, our disaster fund is about $2.3 million upside down. That being said, if we were to have to fill that disaster fund per the auditors, we would have to start taking that from the general fund. At this point in time, the auditors have let us know that most likely they will not make us book back from the general fund. However, by the end of June 30th, 2021, we do anticipate cleaning up this fund. Now, whether that may be from the reserves, from FEMA, or CARES Act, additional fundings, we don't know yet. We're still in that process. However, this is an important note to take, that with both of these funds together at this point, it's about $2 million. We are still reviewing and analyzing some of the other funds that may need some general fund support. Some of them is obviously the disaster fund, which I recently went through with you, the housing authority, self-insurance, and our equipment replacement fund. These are all the funds that we're still working through to see how they're going to be ending the fiscal year and if they're going to need any support. For our general fund reserve balances. So our 18-19 audited unassigned fund balance is about 16% of the total general fund. wanted to provide to you a little bit of a history. So you can see back in 14-15, we're about 53.8 million. We're about 53.3. And we're looking to, if the auditors don't find anything and we're set to go, to end 1920 pretty much at the same at $53.3 million. For our 2021 budget recap. So some of the actions that were taken to start getting ahead of the COVID-19 impacts into our 2021 budget. We implemented the 5% furloughs across the board for all of our bargaining groups, saving the city about $3 million. We reduced departmental operating budget by about $10.8 million. We've defunded 14 full-time positions. We laid off 54 part-time positions, furloughed 42. And we do have a contingency plan for this, the $10 million in case we need it. We are planning to use about $4 million in reserves if we need to, and $6 million in CIP. Now, you may remember during the 1920, when we're starting to talk about COVID impacts and that $10 million or $18 million scenarios, we were taking down $6 million of capital improvement projects one time to help offset the general fund expenditures. We did not need to take that in 1920. We kept that cash in the capital project. That cash is still available to help us through 2021. And we still have that set aside, not to be spent, to be temporarily deferred until we know more information on the city's finances. So a 2021 adopted budget recap for you is our 1920 adopted budget for $142.1 million. We reduced year over year into the 2021 adopted budget by 5.6 million. With the 136.6 million in the general fund budget, we had identified about $10 million, of which the 6 we have already set aside in the capital funds that we had identified in 1920, and 4 million if needed, we would be dipping into the reserves. However, we are monitoring the fiscal situation continually and frequently throughout the year. And we are anticipating to be proactive with this fiscal situation, and particularly with COVID, to be able to get ahead of that. So as a recap, City Council took a swift, immediate actions within 30 days of knowing that COVID did hit us to get ahead of our city's finances. We were the first city in the county to declare the emergency. We within 30 days before council already started to implement $10 million scenario for 1920. And we were ahead of with council on what would happen if the worst case scenario of $18 million were to come to fruition, which did not. We were a lot closer to that 10 million. In fact, we were less than the 10 million. In fiscal year 1920, we're seeing the results. They were very successful. We're balanced, not having to dip into reserves preliminarily, of course. We do hope that the disaster fund will continue to receive federal funding. We do know $1.4 million we're receiving right now. And we do have a AA+ credit rating for the city of Costa Mesa, which is an excellent rating. With that, I did want to let you know that late last week, I had a similar presentation with Standard & Poor's to discuss exactly the 1920-2021 actions and to get in front of COVID. They were very impressed with all of the actions that the city took to make sure that our businesses were providing relief, that we were providing zoning changes to allow them to continue to conduct their businesses, that we're getting ahead of our emergency costs and documentation, as well as the multiple developments that are currently still on the books for the city of Costa Mesa. I have to tell you, that was a very successful meeting with Standard & Poor's. I am anticipating a positive feedback from them. they were, and they did express to me that they were very impressed with all of our actions. With that, I will go ahead and close out the presentation, and let's see if you have any questions.
I have a question, Carol. Excellent report, by the way. That was a blur of numbers there. Going back to to the year 1920, the operating deficit, if I got this right, was 2.3 million roughly. Is that right?
So let me kind of go back and let me see which slide. I'll go ahead and share the screen, see if we're on the same slide. For 1920, the expenditures came in under by $4.8 million. So the adopted budget was $142.2 million. At this moment, the actual expenditures is 137.4. So the departments were able to reduce their expenses by a little bit under $5 million.
Okay, but I don't see all the numbers right. What's the actual operating deficit?
So there
expenses and revenue. I didn't quite.
Okay, all right. Here we go. So in this slide here, you'll see the general fund. You'll see the revenue that came in, the actual revenues to date at 137.6 against $137.4 million of expenses. So we are to the good of about 250,000.
Are you?
So
There was no deficit in 19.
So there is no deficit, you're saying? It's positive 250K.
Correct.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you. Carol, are you going to be able to send us this report email?
Yes, I'll be setting this as soon as we're done here.
Great.
So
Are we sending that to the Daily Pilot so they can correct their headline that's caused everyone to believe something that's been false? Sorry, that's rhetorical.
Carol, question. So with what I think you understand, what I understand is got a 250K positive. We did not have to use reserves in 1920.
That is correct.
Okay, now we got this 2.3 million hanging out here in the disaster fund. The government, either state or federal, may come through with $1.4 million, you're saying.
They will. They've already
will.
committed that $1.4 million. We've already started to receive it.
Okay, so could briefly, what type of expenses make up that went into the disaster fund? Is that's separate from the FEMA reimbursements?
No, the disaster fund covers everything. So in this fund, we've separated it by department and by project. So for example, our sanitizing the city hall, city facilities, our safety fleet, those expenses, PPEs are in there. So all those types of expense timesheets, for example, on staff time spent on COVID related.
So it's can I say, could you say it's internal costs experienced or incurred by the city in reaction to COVID?
Correct.
It's not doing work, and it's not assisting retail businesses, for example, or anything like that. It's internal cost to the city, increased cost because of COVID that the city had to incur.
Correct.
Okay, so are you submitting the full? I guess the full what is it? 3.3 or 3.4 million for reimbursement.
So how this works with FEMA, so I'll give you a little bit of a background with FEMA. FEMA has been very picky about what they will reimburse and will not reimburse. And from my understanding, they're really relying on some of the CARES Act money that we have been receiving to help offset some of these expenses. So for example, the 1.4 million that we just talked about, they're expecting that to be offset by some of the reimbursements that they may or may not be willing to make.
Okay,
So,
all right. Okay, so potentially the city has some exposure that all of that will not get reimbursed.
no, we have already started to receive some reimbursements. So
I know, but do you know if the city will get reimbursed the full amount?
at this time, I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know if it would be the
that's
full
what I'm
amount.
saying. There's a potential risk there that the city might have to absorb some of that cost. Is that fair?
Correct, depending on what happens. I mean, there's so many
Right.
unknowns.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying there's a potential out there.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, any other questions? I'm sure there's some more questions.
I have a couple
I
questions.
have a question. I'll go after Tom.
I'm sorry, Wendy, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so thank you for that very detailed good news report. When you mentioned the 4 million in the reserve and the 6 million in the CIP, you haven't had to go into those yet, but would you be more inclined to go into the CIP than you would into the reserve to make up the shortfall?
At this time, I would. That would, because we did not need it in 1920. We had set it specifically aside in 1920. We're continuing that set aside for this purpose.
Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you.
I had a question.
Tom Pollitt?
Carol, super job. That presentation was pretty easy to follow. Thank you. The first question is, in that previous slide that we were at, where it showed the 2 million in that one there, is the 3.3 million on top of the 137, or is it part of the 137? So in other words, for our expenditures,
Right,
140 million.
Correct. So if obviously the disaster fund is a separate fund from the general fund. So yes, it would be the 137 plus the 3.
So really our total expenditures were 4.6 million, 140 million 600,000.
Well, I would caution you against that, just because we had multiple other expenditures and other funds that are not shown here. But if you're only going to be looking at the general fund, it's 137, and the disaster fund is 3.4. Keep in mind, this $3.4 million in the disaster fund would not have occurred had it not been for COVID. So I would be hesitant with that. The only thing I would state is that if we do not get further additional monies, some of these monies, however it ends up being by the end.
No, it's a good news story. I was just trying to clarify it in my own head. The other thing that I had a question on was, last month you talked about the sales tax coming in double for May. How was that resolved? Did they not pay us in June, or was it ever resolved? What happened there?
They did pay us in June, but we did receive a small allocation, which was their cleanup. So they never responded to me whether or not that was a double payment or error on their part. The only thing I did find out was in June, we had a minor allocation and they closed out the quarter at that point.
So May and June's revenue was abnormally high, abnormally low, right where it was supposed to be. I don't understand what you said.
Well, it's kind of difficult to say what's normal because it's COVID time, right? So when we were looking at 1920 and taking a look at the COVID impacts, the May disbursement from the sales tax was almost double what we were expecting based on COVID, not based on what we normally receive. Just knowing that we were going to be impacted by the closures of COVID, we were alarmed to have received such a large disbursement. So we went ahead and reached out to HDL, our consultant, and to the state to see, wait a minute, what's happening here? And that's when we started to hear that the May disbursement was probably doubled up, and to be careful with the June disbursement, right? We weren't sure if we were going to get anything in June, or if the May disbursement was too large, right? So when the June disbursements came in, we did receive some monies, which made me happy that okay, we're not going to get clawed back any money. So we're good. They closed out the quarter, and in a sense, our fiscal year. Now we're starting new in 2021 without the fear of a clawback. And that's where I was really concerned, is if they gave us too much, would they come back?
So basically, if I made the statement that in May and June, COVID didn't affect us, we weren't affected by our revenue for sales tax.
No, we were. We were definitely affected by our revenues and sales tax. We received less sales tax than we would have otherwise received, significantly. So let me show you the slide that will tell you that. So you can see here, our sales tax was reduced by $2.9 million from our adopted budget. So we lost $3 million in essence of sales tax dollars.
Yep, but we had lost that in March and April. Remember, if the slides that you showed us last week, we were down about 2 million in March and April. So June, May and June were pretty much what we originally budgeted.
Those were my estimates for year end. So in May, remember, we received a larger disbursement, but it covered May and June. Our June estimate was small. Thankfully, when we were going through the 1920 estimates and getting ahead of COVID in April with the council, we were able to pull back on the expenses and come back with these two scenarios. And that first scenario of that $10 million is what we were closer to. So we did see a reduction in sales tax because of COVID. So my estimates were revised because of COVID.
They lost more in hotel tax than we did in sales tax.
Well, a lot of our hotel industry took a very, very large impact.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Carol, could you go back to that slide just previous to this one? Yeah. The one that showed the disaster fund and general fund.
There we go.
That one, yeah. Okay, now I think I'm confused again. At the end of 10 months, we showed a $4.7 million operating deficit. So now here I'm looking at general fund, $251,000 to the good. But I'm so is that the operating, the balance right there? Revenues versus expenditures. Forget about the disaster fund.
Correct. Those are the actual numbers to date. Preliminary numbers to date, we have $137.6 million that came in on revenues by June 30th against $137.4 million expense for a positive $250,000.
That's operating results, preliminary, of course, at the end of the fiscal year, correct?
Correct.
No, that's just for the general fund, you said.
That's just for the general fund.
Yeah, there's other funds, like the disaster fund, we lost $2 million. God knows what other funds are out there.
Tom, the disasters fund did not lose $2 million. This is money that had to be spent as a result of COVID.
Yeah, right. Understand that.
I mean, I think it's a misnomer saying we lost money. It's money that had to get spent.
We spent $2 million more than we had revenue for. Okay.
Because of COVID.
Because of COVID, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, let me interject here. We did receive from the state an award of $1.4 million.
Which we'll get next year and go against next year. I understand.
It will go against even these expenses because the COVID dollars are slated for expenses from mid-March to December 30th. So right now we are with the auditors on how to properly code those amounts. We're being told that even though it will hit in 2021, the revenue side, we can still go out there and for now, until we have a final discussion with the auditors, we'll go against this 2.3 million.
Hey,
Aren't we on a cash basis and not an accrual basis? How do you mix the two back and forth? It's kind of confusing.
Well, because it all depends, yes, on when those dollars are coded to. So in this case, this $1.4 million is a really good example, okay? So in this case, we knew before June 30th that the state was going to provide us $1.4 million. However, we did not get the official award from the state until July. Had the state provided us with the official award from them, then the auditors would have allowed us to post that $1.4 million into 1920. So all of these are more auditing GASB rules. However, it does impact how the funds end the fiscal year.
Hey, Carol.
Yes.
So isn't it true that it's kind of like, in a way, what happened was we have a disaster, and then as a result of the disaster, we have to expend the money immediately. And so you're going to recognize the expenses, obviously, in the year that you spend the money, and there's no way to delay spending that money because you need the money to address the disaster right away. And in all circumstances, when you have something like that, you're going to get reimbursed for those expenses in arrears. Now, they might be reimbursed because we have to present the expenses and get FEMA. Hold on. And get FEMA reimbursements, or we might get these awards, that can be applied. But this idea of recognition, in this circumstance, you're always going to recognize the expenses substantially before you recognize the revenue, because that's just the way it goes. So it's not analytically reasonable to say that we should have some parity in time with when we're doing the expenses and getting the revenue, similar to what we can see in the general fund when we have a history and we can plan kind of when we're going to get our revenues and when we're going to get our expenses, and then foot it or tie it up at the end. In this circumstance, you're always going to be upside down because you spend the money first. Am I right?
That is correct. Especially, yes, exactly correct. We're always going to be spending first in the case of an emergency. And you're correct. Most of the federal dollars, like FEMA, they're reimbursables. They will not reimburse you unless you spent it.
And then there's a period of time, Carol, is it not, where there's a delay? So you make the expenditure, you then ask for reimbursement, and then there's a period of time, and maybe you can give us an estimate of how long that is before you actually get that reimbursement, because it has to be processed and evaluated, correct?
Correct. Now with FEMA, I will tell you, nobody knows how long their process is. Especially keeping in mind that so many entities across the country are now clamoring for FEMA dollars. And it's not just for COVID, you know, there's been fires and hurricanes and other emergencies going on too. So they are really being bombarded, which would probably delay any response from them as a result.
So even if we had, Carol, let me ask you a question. Even if we had the smartest city council that's ever been on any dais, all with degrees in finance, and all operating at the top of their game, and we hired the very, very best finance director and city manager that could ever be molded by the good Lord himself, would it change the sequence of expenses to revenues that I just laid out?
No.
Well, there you go. That's good.
Well, John, you hit on the problem of municipal accounting, okay? In the private sector, you have accrual accounting where everything would be matched properly, which is what in the private sector we're used to. But in municipal accounting, you got this huge mismatch. And if you're on a cash basis, you're not supposed to, cash means cash. It means money came in the bank today, money went out in the bank today. But you want to make adjustments on an accrual basis. In a perfect world, it doesn't seem to work too well in the municipal, right, Carol?
Right, we do have GASB and other state and federal laws and guidelines we have to abide to because we are dealing with public funds. Right. So we are held to a higher level of scrutiny with the funds and how we receive them. And that's why we have auditors from the outside coming in every year and scrutinizing every ledger. Jennifer and her staff spend countless hours preparing for them and making sure everything is properly posted according to a GASB rule.
But you have a matching problem that has to be addressed, right?
Okay, we're getting in the weeds here, people. Let's Wendy, you're on mute. Wendy, you're on mute.
Okay, my dogs were barking. So thank you, Carol. But just for clarification, because we've got a little bit more than 14 million in fund balance for declared disasters, we haven't had to go into that. We haven't broken in. We could have if we wanted to front this money and then replace it, but we're trusting that we're going to get reimbursed. But we haven't broken into our savings, the 14 million for declared disasters. So that says, you know, a lot that, you know, we could have, but I think that's better to be disciplined and wait till they pay us back.
I think back in April timeframe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carol, but I think when put together the 10 million and the 18 million scenarios, the thinking was would have to use approximately $7 million of reserves. And that was reduced to 4 million. And now basically you're saying it's zero.
That's correct. We did come up with those scenarios to obtain council authority to dip into reserves if we had to. And thankfully we didn't have to.
Okay, so this is super good news in that the city didn't have to use any reserves in 1920. Now, again, there's the disaster fund, but you know, hopefully get reimbursed for that, but it may be months before we'll know about that.
I think the really good news is if you look at 18-19, I think our operating budget, not capital improvements, but the operating budget was around 152 million. And we ended up spending this year 140 million. So you guys cut $10 million out of your expenses, which is a super job and took a lot of hard work. And you did it over 3 months instead of 4 months instead of 12 months.
Part of that was CIP, right?
So that's.
No. Thankfully, I'm glad you brought that up. We ended up not touching the $6 million in CIP, and we kept it in the CIP fund as cash for 2021 as a contingency plan for 2021. We did go out in 1920 and requested authority to use that $6 million in 1920 if we needed to, but thankfully we didn't need it.
Yeah. You guys did a great job on the expense side.
Yeah, super job. Carol,
the 137 million, how much was that checks to CalPERS? Do you know?
Right off the top of my head, I don't know. I can get that to you later, but
Carol, another question. You mentioned, okay, so in the 10 million scenario, 6 million of that was capital. You're saying, so those projects just got either canceled or deferred.
so what we deferred those capital projects.
Okay, so you still got the money in the bank you're saying you have. So the part of the savings was the $6 million not spent on capital.
No, we kept it. So we ended up not needing it at all for general fund at all, which was beautiful.
But whether you say cutting or deferring, it's the same
can
thing.
I make a comment, or can you let me know when I can make a comment? Because I'm not on the screen, I'm not sure how to get my.
Yeah, sorry, Anna. Okay, so clarify this for me then. We deferred the 6 million. Is the 6 million part of the 137?
No.
137 million? Okay, so what you're saying is the city saved even more money.
No, the other way around.
Right. I think it depends on how you see it. We did not end up having to dip into those CIP funds at all. As a result.
Right, but the city didn't spend the money on those projects.
That's correct.
So they don't count as expenditures in 1920.
That's correct.
So aren't they savings and part of the savings of 1920 because the money was not spent?
That's the capital budget, not the operating budget.
I know, but it comes out of the general fund.
So the $6 million was in a capital fund that we had asked council to authorize us to defer to help offset the general fund.
Correct. Okay.
So that $6 million is still in the capital fund.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Ralph, can I make a comment?
Yes, Anna, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to say thank you to the staff, and I think it is fantastic news to be less in the hole than we thought we would be. But I just think it's still trying to paint too rosy of a picture. Basically, I sat back and just listened. And to me, it still means, okay, we didn't spend that $6 million on COVID stuff, but that $6 million also didn't get spent on capital improvement stuff that needed to happen last year. So we pushed stuff back. Also, we, furloughed staff and cut positions and cut things how we're doing them, including with committee meetings. So the quality of everything is less, meaning either less quantity or it has to be everything is bare bones because we're saving money. So I think the cost benefit also has to be put in perspective in that way too, that yes, we are in less of a hole than we thought. And also we shouldn't be afraid to just look at things instead of, tapping ourselves on the shoulder and say we acted and we're going to get paid back. Sometimes just say, yes, that 4 million might not get paid back. We still might get paid back. So that's pretty good news, but just call it as it is, because that's the best way to start moving things forward is when you can paint a clear picture of where you're actually at, not where you wish you were at. So it is great news, but I think, there's still a long, long way to go. Thank you, Ralph.
No, thank you.
Carol,
I think some of the open issues is certainly 2021 is we're dependent upon COVID. I mean, if the county continues to decrease exposure and people coming down with COVID and obviously deaths and stuff, then the city will continue, the county will continue to open up.
November 4th, it'll open up, Ralph. It'll all open up November 4th.
Okay. Tom Arnold, you had some
comment? Carol, Anna used the phrase, we're still in the hole. Is that how you would characterize our situation?
For 1920, we thankfully were balanced. For 2021, we really don't know, right? Because we did a budget with the $10 million going into the reserves. we realigned the 6 million to bring it down to that $4 million. But we're still planning to be proactive in trying to end the 2021 in a balanced year as much as we possibly can. However, you know, there's a lot that we don't know with COVID, you know. Until we pass through this pandemic and things start looking a little bit more normal, we really won't know, which is why it's very critical for us to continue to monitor the fiscal situation frequently.
I've got a question. Ralph has brought this up before. So what about the overtime? Are we monitoring that? And is that going to be a surprise? You know,
so I'm glad you brought that up. We are monitoring that. The fire department overtime, last time I looked at it, when we started to compare it year over year to date, it was about 15–16% less than the prior year. In this 1920, I do want to recognize some strike team mutual aid reimbursements that we did receive in 1920, which would be net neutral for the fire department. I think that is appropriate. And then we'll continue to monitor it as we move forward. But we are constantly monitoring it. I've already met with both of the chiefs on their overtimes.
Okay. Okay, Carol, thank you again. Thank you to you and staff. Super job, and all the operating departments who were able to mitigate their expenses, reduce their expenses. So are you mentioned, we got here preliminary and audited report for 1920, then we got 2021 adjustments. You went through that briefly for the current year. What you just presented to us, is that going to get presented to council, or will you wait until you get the final audited numbers for 1920 before you present to council?
I'll be presenting to council on Tuesday night.
Okay, this information that you presented, okay.
It would be similar, yes.
Okay, for the first look at 2021, is that in the still November timeframe, or?
That's correct. Our first quarter has not closed yet. So we're planning to come back in November to provide everybody with a first quarter results and any cleanup items that we may need to address in 2021.
Okay. All right. So we have a discussion, I guess, November 11. Somebody's looked ahead here, and that is Veterans Day. Is that, I assume that's a city holiday?
Yes, it is. City Hall will be closed that day.
Okay, so we need to change that date for the November meeting, I guess.
What I would, if you may, Chair, what I would like to propose is if we need to get to a special meeting, and we can call one similar to what we were doing during COVID. So that way it provides us with some flexibility and any information that you may want in that November meeting.
Okay, when do you, I guess, which council meeting in November are thinking of presenting the first quarter of 2021?
I'm anticipating that first council meeting, which I think is slated for November 10th.
Yeah, the 10th is the second Tuesday, yes. Okay, so anything, and this is the way that the calendar works, anything presented to FiPAC would be subsequent to the council meeting. Okay. All right, well, any comments on that, Wendy or anybody on the, I guess, just make it tentative for potential special meeting in November?
Right, I prefer Wednesday because that's when I have a day off. So.
Yeah, but
can we just move it a week to the 18th?
Why not?
Yeah, I move we move it to the 18th.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Well, that's what I was. For me. That's why I was initially thinking, but then Carol, you mentioned maybe holding it open. And are you okay with the 18th?
I'd have to double check. We're getting really close to Thanksgiving around that time. But let me double check. But if that's a preference, we can, if you may, maybe consider a special meeting for the 18th.
Okay, all right.
Yes, thank you.
Let's pencil in the 18th, but subject to potential change, I guess. But hopefully we could keep the 18th.
I have one last question, if I may. For this first
Yes.
quarter, July, August, September, Carol, do you have any feel for what happened, unaudited as it is?
Unfortunately not. Jennifer is still posting back to that first quarter. So until I seen the numbers coming to fruition, I'm not comfortable speaking on that first quarter at this time.
Okay, well, all right. Well, we've bumped a little past the hour, but again, thank you, Carol, Jennifer, and staff. Super job, and then certainly to the whole city for. I mean, looks like 1920 is looking a lot better than imagined 2-3 months ago. That's for sure. Also, then, if any of the committee members have comments. Please send those to Angie prior to our November meeting. And with that, I guess, if there's no other comments.
Ralph, can I ask something really quick? This is Angie.
Sure.
Can I just confirm that the only vote taken was the approval of the minutes and that there was no vote taken on the scheduling of a special meeting on November 18th?
Yes. You could say tentative for 18th.
But is that something that was voted on?
No, it wasn't voted on. I think it was kind of agreed upon, though.
Yeah,
Should we?
Carol's stuff.
We have to check the mayor's calendar to make sure that's okay first.
I just need to determine if it needs to go in the minutes.
We could take a quick vote.
Well, I made a motion for the 18th, but that's as far as we went.
And I'll second it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Bob. I did not hear the motion.
The motion is we have the meeting on November 18th.
A special meeting.
Tentative.
No, the motion is not tentative. The motion is we have the meeting on the 18th.
I'll second it.
Okay, we got Bob and then a second by Al, Big Al.
Hey.
Any discussion? Carol, I just want to make sure if you're okay with this. I would,
I'm a little hesitant just because we're so close to the Thanksgiving holidays. But if maybe a discussion of having it tentative would probably be preferable in my mind, so we could have additional discussion. And also check with the mayor and the mayor pro tem and their availability as well.
Okay, let me offer a substitute.
Let me amend the motion to we have it on the 18th, subject to Carol's availability.
Well, also other people's. Let's just say.
And only if we have a blue moon the night before.
Bob, why don't you just make your motion a tentative November 18th.
All right, that's the motion.
I second it reluctantly.
Okay, we got Tom and then Al. All those in favor? Okay, I guess I got to go around the horn here. I vote A or yes. Wendy?
Yes.
Tom Pollock?
No.
Bob Junman?
Yes.
Al Malone?
Yes.
Matthew?
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
Tom Arnold?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 7-1. Okay, so tentative November 18th special meeting. Could I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Moved.
Okay, Tom Pollock and Bob Junman second. All those in favor?
Aye.
We'll just do it by voice. Okay.
Aye, let's get out of here.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Great job, staff. Great
Carol.
job.
Thank you.
Carol, super job.
Way to go, Carol. Way to go, Angie.
Thank you.
Thank you all.